It was a bright June morning at Mercy Hospital in Boston, where twin sisters Grace and Hannah Wilson prepared for one of the happiest moments of their lives, giving birth on the same day. With joy and excitement filling the air, their journey into motherhood was unfolding side by side. Both sisters were eager to welcome their children into the world, sharing in each other's nerves and anticipation. However, amidst the celebrations, a twist of fate was waiting to turn their lives upside down. When their babies were accidentally switched, the joy of becoming mothers became overshadowed by doubt, suspicion, and a heartbreaking mystery. As Grace and Hannah grappled with their fears, the bonds of sisterhood and motherhood would be tested in ways they never imagined. Would love to prevail over this devastating truth. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell to avoid missing any videos. Before we dive into this story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. The scorching June sun poured over Mercy Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, casting a golden glow that seemed to reflect the intensity of emotions inside. The air crackled with excitement and raw nerves as Grace and Hannah Wilson, identical twin sisters, prepared to embark on the most extraordinary journey, giving birth, side by side, on the same day. In rooms just steps apart, their voices intertwined, filling the hallway with anxious laughter and whispered words of hope. Grace, older by a mere 3 minutes, gently cradled her swollen belly, her heart pounding in rhythm with the world outside. Staring out the window, she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Can you believe this, Han? We're doing this together." Hannah's eyes shimmered with unshed tears of joy, her smile radiant despite the flicker of fear shadowing her face. "It's like we've always been connected. From the very beginning," she murmured, then hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down. "Are you scared?" Grace nodded, biting her lip, her vulnerability exposed in that instant. "Terrified. But more than anything, I can't wait to hold my baby, to see that tiny face I've dreamed of." As if sensing the gravity of the moment, their mother, Evelyn, entered the room, her hands trembling as she clutched 2 bouquets. Her eyes, misted with tears, spoke of immeasurable pride. "My beautiful girls," she choked, her voice breaking with emotion. "I've never been prouder of you both." The sisters shared a glance, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Their entire lives had been lived in tandem, 2 halves of the same whole, and now, as they stood on the cusp of motherhood, the bond between them felt almost too powerful to put into words. The lively chatter of the family was interrupted by Nurse Lisa, who stepped in with a smile that radiated warmth. "Looks like we've got 2 anxious moms here," she teased, her voice a soothing balm. "Let's get you both ready for the big moment." The next few hours blurred into a whirlwind of pain, gasping breaths, and whispered words of encouragement that hung heavy with love. Grace was the first to be taken into the delivery room, her hand clutching her sister's until the last possible second. Soon after, Hannah followed, her heart racing with both fear and exhilaration. In the hallway, their father, Robert, paced like a man on the edge, his anxiety carved into every step. "2 grandbobbies, both at once," he muttered, his voice a mixture of awe and overwhelming anticipation. And then, like magic, the cries of new life filled the air. Grace's son arrived first, his lusty wail echoing through the halls as he was placed into her trembling arms, a shock of dark hair crowning his tiny head. Moments later, Hannah's daughter entered the world, her strong lungs making their presence known as if challenging her cousin to a race. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 1 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Nurses scurried from one room to the next, their joy infectious. "Both babies are healthy and strong," one remarked to another, a smile lighting her face. "I can't wait to see these sisters holding their babies side by side." It was a moment of unbreakable love, fierce strength, and lives forever changed. 2 sisters, 2 new souls, and the beginning of a story more powerful than anyone could have imagined. Hours later, the pale afternoon light spilled into the hospital room where Grace and Hannah, exhausted but glowing with joy, found themselves reunited in a larger room. Their newborns lay nestled in cribs beside them, tiny, delicate creatures that had already transformed their world. The room hummed with a peaceful stillness, broken only by the soft murmurs of the sisters, their connection as deep as it had always been, but now magnified by this shared, miraculous experience. Grace, her body heavy with fatigue, turned her head toward her sister, a slow smile spreading across her face. She reached out across the space between their beds, her hand trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and overwhelming love. "We did it," And she whispered, her voice fragile with emotion, as though saying the words out loud might make the magic of the moment too real to comprehend. Hannah, her blue eyes bright with tears that had been threatening to spill since the baby's first cries filled the air, reached out to meet her sister's hand. She squeezed it tightly, letting the warmth of Grace's touch anchor her in this dizzying new reality. "Yes, we did it, Gracie," she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but her smile was wide, radiating a mixture of relief, pride, and pure, unfiltered joy. The bond between them, already unbreakable, felt stronger now, as if the act of bringing life into the world at the same time had fused their hearts even more tightly together. They lay there for a few quiet moments, content to simply exist in the stillness, absorbing the gravity of what had just unfolded. Their entire lives had been lived in tandem, always side by side, sharing everything from childhood secrets to wedding days. And now motherhood had become the latest chapter in their intertwined story. As they gazed at their babies, the future unfurled before them like a brightly lit path. They imagined family gatherings filled with laughter, playdates with their children growing up together, and holidays that would now be even more joyful with two new lives to celebrate. But for now, at this moment, they simply savored the quiet joy of having their babies beside them so close, yet the unknowable distance between them had already begun to form. Their tender reverie was interrupted by the sound of hurried footsteps. Nurse Lisa entered the room, her expression a mix of gentle efficiency and a barely concealed rush. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said, smiling kindly but moving briskly between the cribs. "I just need to take your little ones for some quick routine checks." She bent down to scoop up the newborns, her actions swift but careful. In her haste, however, she made a small but fateful mistake, one that would change the course of both families forever. Without realizing it, Nurse Lisa switched the babies, placing Hannah's daughter in Grace's crib and Grace's son in Hannah's. The switch happened in a blur, unnoticed by the exhausted mothers, still floating in their shared bliss. As the door clicked softly shut behind the nurse, the room seemed to return to its quiet calm. Grace and Hannah, oblivious to the monumental error that had just occurred, resumed their conversation, their hearts light and filled with plans for the future. They dreamed of birthday parties and shared moments of motherhood, their voices intertwining with the love they had carried for each other since birth. Little did they know, their journey was about to become far more complicated than they could have ever imagined. Weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and the frenzied rhythm of caring for newborns. The days were long, filled with late-night feedings, diaper changes, and a constant, underlying fatigue that seemed to wrap itself around both sisters like a heavy blanket. Despite the exhaustion, both Grace and Hannah found moments of quiet joy in their new roles as mothers. Yet beneath the surface, a strange, unspoken feeling had begun to stir. In the warm, quiet kitchen of Grace's home in Brookline, the scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, offering a brief comfort amidst the chaos. Grace leaned heavily against the kitchen counter, dark circles beneath her eyes betraying just how worn out she felt. Her husband, Alex, stood nearby, cradling their baby Ethan in his arms. His movements were gentle, almost reverent, as he rocked the infant back and forth, his tiredness softened by the sheer awe of fatherhood. "He's finally asleep," Alex whispered, his voice a low murmur as he glanced at his wife, a weary smile tugging at his lips. "How are you holding up, darling?" Grace let out a deep sigh, running a hand through her tangled hair. "I'm exhausted, but happy," she replied, her words a mix of truth and something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. She shifted her gaze to her son, sleeping soundly in Alex's arms, but as she watched him, a strange thought began to form. "It's just, sometimes when I look at Ethan, I feel different. I don't know how to explain it." Alex frowned, concern flickering across his face. He took a step closer, his brow furrowed. "Different? What do you mean? Is something wrong?" Grace hesitated, biting her lip. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the unease that had been creeping into her thoughts. "No, it's probably nothing," she said softly. "Maybe it's just the exhaustion. I'm probably overthinking things." Across town in Cambridge, Hannah was having a similar conversation with her husband, Michael. The quiet of their home was broken only by the soft sounds of their daughter, Olivia, feeding at Hannah's breast. Her tiny hands clutched at her mother, her eyes closed in peaceful contentment. But as Hannah gazed down at her daughter, a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. "Michael," Hannah called softly, her voice laced with uncertainty, "don't you think Olivia looks more like you than me?" Michael, standing nearby, raised an eyebrow in surprise. He moved closer, leaning over to study their daughter's face. "Well, "She's got your eyes," he said thoughtfully, brushing a finger gently across Olivia's soft cheek. "But yeah, I see what you mean. Why? Does it bother you?" Hannah shook her head, though the feeling in her chest remained. "No, not really. It's just something I've been thinking about lately. I don't know. Maybe it's just new mom nerves," she added, forcing a smile as she tried to push the thought away. But as both sisters went about their days, the nagging feeling continued to grow. It was subtle at first, a fleeting thought, a passing glance. But with each new day, the unease deepened. It wasn't just exhaustion, and it wasn't just nerves. There was something more, a faint, gnawing instinct that neither Grace nor Hannah could fully articulate. Unbeknownst to them, the lives they thought they had settled into were already built on a mistake, one that would soon unravel the very fabric of their bond. What had started as the perfect story of sisterhood, shared motherhood, and joy was about to become a test of their strength, love, and resilience. The truth, buried beneath the surface, waited patiently to be uncovered. And when it was, everything they believed would be shaken to its core. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of new motherhood brought Grace and Hannah together regularly for breakfast sessions, their babies in tow. These moments, shared over cups of coffee and tired smiles, seemed to strengthen the bond between them even more. But during one of these casual meetings, something in the air shifted. As Grace watched her son, Ethan, playing on the carpet next to Olivia, a strange thought began to form, one she couldn't shake. Grace said, her brow furrowed in thought as she gazed at her son, "Don't you think Ethan looks a lot like Michael?" Hannah, caught off guard, glanced at Ethan with a thoughtful expression. She studied his face, his features so distinct yet oddly familiar. "Now that you mention it," she trailed off, biting her lip. "But it must be a coincidence, right? I mean, we're twins. It's natural for our kids to share similarities." Grace nodded, forcing herself to accept the explanation, but something gnawed at her, deep down, refusing to be silenced. She couldn't help but notice how Olivia mirrored Michael's features more than her own husband's. As the morning went on, Grace found herself observing Hannah with Olivia, the way they moved in sync, the deep, almost primal connection between them. Grace's heart twinged with a feeling she dared not name: envy. A small, hollow ache formed in her chest as she questioned why her bond with Ethan didn't feel quite the same. That night, long after the house had fallen silent and Alex lay fast asleep beside her, Grace remained wide awake, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm. Doubts bubbled up, growing louder and more persistent with every passing minute. She turned over, nudging Alex, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alex," she murmured, "have you ever wondered if Ethan is ours?" If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. Alex blinked, startled awake, his confusion turning quickly to concern. "What are you talking about, Grace?" he asked, sitting up as the weight of her words began to sink in. Grace hesitated, her heart pounding. "It's just, sometimes I look at him, and I don't see us in him at all. And today, when I saw him next to Olivia, he looked so much like Michael. It's strange." Alex stared at her for a moment, processing her words. He reached out, gently cupping her face. "Grace, you're exhausted. You've barely slept since he was born. It's normal to have strange thoughts when you're this tired. Ethan is our son, there's no doubt about that." Grace nodded, trying to shake off the creeping unease, but deep down, she knew the seed of doubt had already been planted. No matter how hard she tried to dismiss it, something about the way Ethan didn't seem to fit into her world gnawed at her soul. Across town, Hannah was having a similar night. She woke up with a start, her heart racing, the remnants of a disturbing dream clinging to her consciousness. In the dream, Olivia had been taken from her, stolen away into the dark, and Hannah had been left helpless, screaming in the silence of her mind. Shaking off the nightmare, she looked down at her sleeping daughter, her tiny face peaceful and serene, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mother's heart. An overwhelming wave of love crashed over Hannah, so intense that it nearly took her breath away. But with that love came an unsettling fear, a fear she couldn't rationalize. What if Olivia wasn't hers? What if some terrible mistake had been made, and the daughter she adored wasn't truly hers to keep? As the night dragged on, both sisters lay awake in their separate homes, the unspoken fears binding them together across the city. Though they didn't say it out loud, the growing sense that something was wrong haunted them both. They watched their babies, searching for answers in the innocent faces before them, grappling with the mysteries of motherhood and the invisible ties that tether us to the ones we love. One afternoon, Grace sat in her mother's kitchen, her thoughts heavy with the weight of her unspoken doubts. The air was thick with tension, and the soft clinking of teacups was the only sound breaking the silence. Grace hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at her mother, Evelyn, who sat across from her, studying her with a knowing gaze. "Mom," Grace began, her voice uncertain, "can I ask you something?" Evelyn tensed, her fingers tightening around the delicate porcelain cup. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" Grace hesitated, her words faltering as she tried to voice the feelings that had been swirling in her heart for weeks. "Do you think, even now, there's still some sort of competition between Hannah and me, even if it's unconscious?" Evelyn's eyes darkened with something that resembled regret. She placed her teacup down on the table with deliberate care, the clink of porcelain loud in the stillness. "Why are you asking this now?" she said, her voice low, almost hesitant. Grace felt her pulse quicken. There was something in her mother's tone, something that hinted at secrets she hadn't been prepared to face. "I don't know, it's just," Grace faltered, taking a deep breath. "Sometimes I wonder if there are things from our past that still affect us, things I don't understand." Evelyn sighed deeply, her expression a mixture of sadness and reluctance. "Grace, there are things about your past, about your relationship with Hannah, that your father and I never told you. We thought it would be better that way." Grace's heart pounded in her chest, the knot in her stomach tightening. "What things, Mom?" she pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn looked down at her hands, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. "When you were teenagers," she began slowly, "there was an incident. You did something, Grace, something that hurt Hannah deeply. Even though you didn't mean to, it left a mark on her." Grace felt the blood drain from her face, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if to steady herself. "What did I do?" she whispered, her voice trembling with the fear of what her mother might reveal. Evelyn hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "There was a boy. You and Hannah both liked him, but he chose you. It wasn't your fault, Grace. But Hannah took it hard. She felt like she lost something to you. And even though she tried to move on, that feeling stayed with her for a long time." Grace's breath caught in her throat, the weight of the revelation crashing down on her. "I never knew. I didn't realize," she said, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" "We thought it would fade with time," Evelyn replied softly. "But sometimes, these things don't disappear. They just lie dormant, waiting to resurface." She reached out, placing a hand over Grace's. "I'm telling you this because I think you need to understand that not everything is as it seems. Sometimes the past has a way of lingering, even when we least expect it." Grace sat there, stunned into silence, as the pieces of her life slowly began to shift and rearrange themselves, the truth coming into focus with devastating clarity. Hannah sat there, her heart thudding in her chest, her mind flashing back to the painful memories she had buried long ago. She hadn't thought about him in years, the boy she had secretly adored, the one Grace had unknowingly swept away. It had felt like betrayal then, a silent fracture in their sisterhood, one that had taken years to heal. But hearing it spoken aloud, all these years later, brought the old wound surging to the surface. She opened her eyes but couldn't look at Grace right away. "I never wanted you to know," Hannah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never told you because it wasn't your fault. You didn't know, and I didn't want to ruin what we had. But it hurt so much back then." Grace felt a lump forming in her throat. "I didn't realize, Han. I had no idea. I never wanted to hurt you, ever." Her voice wavered, and the guilt she'd never known she carried began to tighten around her heart. Hannah took a shaky breath, finally turning to meet her sister's gaze. "We've moved past it," she said quietly, though the pain still lingered in her eyes. "But it left something between us, something I never fully let go of. It was stupid, and I should have just talked to you back then." Grace shook her head. "It wasn't stupid. You had every right to feel how you did. And now, I think it's happening again. There's something between us, something we've both been avoiding." She paused, her hands trembling as she clasped them in her lap. "I need to talk to you about Ethan." Hannah frowned, confusion flashing across her face. "Ethan, what do you mean?" Grace looked down, her chest tightening with fear. "I can't shake this feeling that something's wrong. When I look at Ethan, I don't always see myself or Alex in him. And when I see him with Olivia," her voice broke as she struggled to continue. "I think there might have been a mix-up at the hospital." Hannah's eyes widened, her face paling as the weight of Grace's words sank in. "Grace, are you saying?" "I think our babies were switched," Grace whispered, her voice trembling with the intensity of the admission. "I don't know for sure, but I've been carrying this fear for weeks. Every time I see Ethan, I feel it. And when I see how much he looks like Michael." Hannah's breath caught in her throat, her pulse racing. She had felt it too, those moments of unease, the flickers of doubt she had tried to dismiss. But she had never let herself fully consider it, never allowed herself to voice the impossible. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. "Grace, what if you're right?" The sisters sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of what Grace had just said hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The autumn wind whipped around them, cold and biting, as if reflecting the turmoil in their hearts. "I didn't want to believe it," Grace continued, her voice barely audible, "but it's been eating at me. And now I just don't know what to do." Hannah stared out at the empty stadium, her mind spinning. She thought back to all the little moments she had questioned. The way Olivia sometimes felt like a stranger in her arms. The way Ethan seemed to light up in ways that reminded her of Michael. It was terrifying, yet it all made a strange kind of sense. "What do we do?" Hannah finally asked, her voice trembling. "If it's true, if we've been raising each other's children, how do we fix this?" Grace shook her head, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't know," she admitted, the words feeling like a confession. "I'm scared, Han. I don't know if I can handle the truth. What if it tears us apart?" Hannah reached out, placing her hand on Grace's. "Whatever happens, we face it together. We've always been stronger together, remember? We'll figure this out." Grace squeezed her sister's hand, the familiar warmth offering a small comfort amidst the uncertainty. But the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of their bond. "We need to find out for sure," Grace said softly. "We need a DNA test." Hannah nodded, though her heart raced at the thought. "Okay," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. "We'll do it. But no matter what happens, Grace, you're still Ethan's mother, and I'll always be Olivia's. That won't change." Grace smiled through her tears, grateful for Hannah's strength even as her own faltered. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The wind howled around them as they sat together on the cold bench, the vast, empty stadium stretching out before them. It felt like a metaphor for the journey they were about to embark on, a journey into the unknown, where the stakes were higher than they could ever have imagined. As they rose to leave, the weight of their decision pressing down on them, Grace turned to Hannah one last time. "No matter what the test says, we'll always be sisters. Nothing will change that." Hannah nodded, her eyes brimming with emotion. "Always." The two walked out of the stadium, their footsteps echoing in the quiet. The wind whipped through the streets of Boston as they made their way home, knowing that whatever the results, their lives and the lives of their children would never be the same again. "I thought we were over it," Grace's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes searching Hannah's face for any sign of reassurance. "Or did we just bury it?" Hannah turned slowly, her face tightening as if Grace's words had reopened a wound she had long thought healed. "What are you implying, Grace?" she asked, her voice edged with hurt. Grace's breath caught, her chest tightening. "I'm not saying you would have, but I'm wondering if that old hurt, that unresolved pain, if it's somehow affecting what's happening now with the babies." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the sharp tension between the two sisters. Hannah felt as though all the air had been sucked from her lungs. For a moment, she could barely breathe. "Do you think," Hannah began, her voice shaking with disbelief, "that I could, that I'd be capable of trading our babies for revenge?" The very idea seemed impossible, but the words hung there, heavy with a terrible possibility she hadn't even considered. Grace's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly, horrified by the misunderstanding. No, that's not what I meant," she insisted, her voice thick with guilt. It's this whole situation, these doubts. Maybe they're pulling up old resentments that we never fully resolved." Hannah stood abruptly, pushing herself away from Grace as though the distance might shield her from the accusation, no matter how unintentional it was. She walked toward the edge of the empty outfield, the once familiar stadium now feeling foreign and cold. Her voice was low, raw with emotion. "I loved you, Grace," she whispered. "More than any rivalry or any old wounds. You were always my sister first. When Olivia was born, I thought this was our chance. I thought becoming mothers together would finally bind us forever." Grace stood frozen for a moment, her heart breaking at the sight of Hannah's back turned to her, shoulders trembling with the weight of everything unsaid. She followed slowly, her tears finally spilling over, leaving streaks down her flushed cheeks. "I thought so too," Hannah said softly. "But now what do we do? Do you think Ethan isn't your nephew? Do you think there was some kind of switch? Hannah remained silent, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if shielding her heart from what she knew was coming. Grace's words, heavy with doubt, lingered in the air. Then finally she nodded. The thought hasn't left my mind either, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And you've had those doubts too, haven't you? Grace's chest tightened, but she nodded slowly. Yes, she whispered, the weight of that admission crashing down on her. I love Ethan more than anything in this world, but what if? What if we find out he isn't mine? Hannah's tears fell freely now, her voice breaking. And what if Olivia isn't mine, she whispered, the very thought so painful she could barely bring herself to say it. The idea that the baby she had cradled, loved, and nourished wasn't truly hers sent shockwaves through her. Grace reached for her sister's hand, squeezing it tightly. What if we find out the truth, she asked, her voice trembling. What if this truth sets us free? Hannah turned to face Grace, her tear-filled eyes meeting her sister's gaze. Years of love, pain, rivalry, and secrets stared back at her. She could feel the weight of every shared moment, every fight, every reconciliation between them, hanging in the balance. And what if the truth destroys us, she asked, her voice filled with fear. Grace squeezed her hand again, her voice soft but firm. Then we face it together, she whispered. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out, you and me, just like we always have. The wind howled through the empty stadium, swirling around the two sisters as they stood in the outfield. The vast space around them a symbol of the uncertainty they were about to face. But at that moment, as they clung to each other, they knew the decision they were about to make would change not only their lives but the lives of their children forever. Hannah's breath shuddered as she finally nodded. Okay, she whispered, the word barely audible. Let's find out the truth together. Grace pulled her into a tight embrace, their tears mingling as they held each other. At that moment, they both wondered if this was the start of a new journey or the beginning of the end of everything they thought they knew. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 3 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The imposing structure of Mercy Hospital loomed against the gray Boston sky as Grace and Hannah walked side by side across the parking lot. The weight of their decision pressed down on them with each hesitant step they took. This was where it had all begun, where their children had been born, where their doubts had taken root. It was only fitting that this was where they would search for the truth. Are you sure about this? Hannah asked, her voice trembling, betraying the fear she was trying to suppress. Grace took a deep breath and squeezed her sister's hand tightly. We need to know, she replied, her voice steady despite the storm of emotion swirling inside her. For us and the babies. They entered the hospital, the sterile scent of antiseptic hitting them immediately. The bright fluorescent lights and quiet hum of activity were a stark contrast to the turmoil they carried with them. At the reception desk, a young nurse smiled politely, though her smile faded slightly as she noticed the tension in their faces. Good afternoon. How can I help you? The nurse asked, her tone professional yet warm. Grace exchanged a glance with Hannah before taking a deep breath. We'd like to talk to someone about a possible error that may have occurred 6 months ago when we gave birth here, she said, her voice shaking just enough to betray her nerves. The nurse's smile faltered, her expression shifting to one of concern. I see, she replied, her voice taking on a more serious tone. Please have a seat. I'll get the maternity supervisor right away. As the nurse walked away, Grace and Hannah sat down in the waiting area, their hearts pounding in their chests. The familiar environment of the hospital only heightened their anxiety. It was here, in these very halls, where their children had been born, where the unthinkable might have happened. Hannah glanced at her sister, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "What if we're wrong?" Grace, her eyes fixed on the floor, whispered back, "What if we're not?" The minutes dragged on, each second feeling like an eternity as they waited for the supervisor. They both knew that whatever happened next would change everything. They just didn't know how much. Grace met Michael's puzzled gaze, her heart racing as she gathered the courage to explain her idea. I know it sounds unconventional, she said slowly, her voice trembling, but maybe this situation calls for something different, something that allows us all to stay connected, no matter what the DNA tests say. The table fell into a thick silence, each person digesting Grace's words, trying to imagine a future where two families could merge into one. It felt impossible yet strangely hopeful at the same time. Hannah wiped away her tears, her voice soft but resolute. "You're saying we don't have to choose between biology and love, that we can keep the bond we've built with the babies, no matter the outcome?" Grace nodded. "Yes, exactly. We've already loved these children for 6 months. We've bonded with them, cared for them, and held them through sleepless nights. Why should that change just because of a test? If we raise them together, we're not just finding out who their biological parents are, we're giving them more love, more support, more family." Michael's brow furrowed, clearly torn between the unconventional suggestion and the love he felt for his daughter, or was she? He leaned back in his chair, his hand running through his hair. "But what does that look like in practice? How would we make it work?" Alex, sitting quietly beside Grace, finally spoke up, his tone thoughtful. "It would mean redefining our idea of family," he said. "Maybe living close to each other, sharing responsibilities, creating a space where both Ethan and Olivia grow up knowing they have 4 parents who love them equally." Hannah's lips quivered as she considered the possibility. "It's not what I imagined, but maybe it's what we need. I love Olivia so much, but I can't bear the thought of losing Ethan either." Alex looked at Grace, his eyes soft with understanding. "It would take a lot of work. It wouldn't be easy, but if this is what's best for the children, maybe it's worth it." Michael, still wrestling with the idea, leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "I need to be honest, this isn't the kind of life I pictured, but I can see the love we all have for these kids. If this is what it takes to keep that love intact, then I'm willing to try." Hannah squeezed Michael's hand, tears filling her eyes again, but this time they were tears of relief. "I can't imagine my life without Olivia," she whispered, "but I also can't imagine turning my back on Ethan, especially if he's yours, Grace." Grace nodded, tears welling up in her own eyes. "We're already connected, Han. Our lives are intertwined in ways we can't untangle. Maybe this is how we stay whole." For the first time in weeks, a sense of calm began to settle over the table. The silence that had once been filled with tension now felt different, lighter, as if they were collectively finding a path forward through the fog of uncertainty. Alex spoke up again, his voice cautious but hopeful. "We'll need to set some boundaries and figure out the details of how this would work. But I think we can make it happen. The most important thing is the kids. They'll grow up knowing they were never abandoned by anyone. They've been surrounded by love from the very beginning." Hannah wiped her eyes, her breath shaky as she nodded. "I want that for them. I want them to feel safe, no matter what happens with the test results." Grace reached across the table, taking Hannah's hand. "We've always been stronger together, Han. We can do this. For Ethan. For Olivia. For us." The cafe door opened, letting in a gust of cold air that sent a shiver through the group, but no one moved. They sat there, 4 parents on the verge of something new and uncertain, but united in one thing: love. After a moment, Michael broke the silence with a soft chuckle. "I can't believe we're considering this. A co-parenting family of 4. It's unconventional, all right." Grace smiled through her tears. "Well, we've never been a conventional family, have we?" The group shared a tentative laugh, the tension easing just slightly. For the first time since they had walked into the hospital with their suspicions, they felt a sense of hope. It was fragile, but it was real. As they all sat there, sipping their now cold coffee, Grace turned to Hannah. "Whatever happens with the DNA test, we face it together. We'll raise these babies with love, no matter what." Hannah nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Together." "Oh." And with that, a new kind of family began to take shape, one built not on conventional rules or expectations, but on love, trust, and the unbreakable bond between sisters. The aroma of the freshly baked apple pie wafted through the shared kitchen, wrapping the room in warmth and the memories of the year that had passed. Grace and Hannah worked side by side, their movements synchronized, as though they had been preparing meals together for decades. Tonight was special. It was Ethan and Olivia's first birthday, a celebration not just of the children, but of the incredible journey their families had embarked on together. "I can't believe it's been a year already," Hannah said, her voice filled with wonder as she spread the icing over the pie. "So much has changed." Grace smiled softly, nodding as she carefully set the table. "A year since we moved here, started this venture, this new kind of life," she said, her voice carrying a hint of pride. "And we've made it work, Han. Through everything." It hadn't been easy. The last year had been filled with more than just milestones. There had been moments of doubt, conflict, of overwhelming emotion as they all adjusted to the complexity of their new family arrangement. But somehow, Against all odds, they had managed to create something beautiful from the uncertainty that once threatened to break them. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the house as Alex and Michael played with Ethan and Olivia in the living room. Their joyful squeals and giggles were a reminder of how far they had come. Grace paused for a moment, listening to the sound, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Remember when we thought we might lose everything?" Grace asked, her voice quiet but filled with emotion. Hannah looked up, meeting her sister's gaze. "I do," she replied, a soft smile playing on her lips. "But we didn't. We fought for this, for each other, and them." Grace nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "We've learned that family isn't just about biology or tradition. It's about choice, about love, about showing up every day for each other, no matter what." Hannah set the pie aside and walked over to Grace, wrapping her in a tight hug. "You're right. We chose this, and I wouldn't change a thing." As they embraced, they both knew that they had forged something unique, a bond, not just as sisters, but as mothers raising their children together in a way that defied convention, yet made perfect sense in their hearts. The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. Grace wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it, her heart light with anticipation. It was the first of many friends and family arriving for the celebration. The house soon filled with the comforting sounds of conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses as everyone came together to honor the journey of this unconventional family. In the living room, Ethan and Olivia sat in high chairs, their eyes wide with wonder as they took in the decorations, the balloons, and the faces of their loved ones. Alex and Michael stood behind them, exchanging proud, knowing glances. The past year had tested them all, but the love they had for their children and each other had carried them through. As the evening progressed, Grace and Hannah stood side by side once more, this time with their husbands, as they prepared to sing happy birthday to Ethan and Olivia. The flickering candles on the cakes illuminated their faces, casting a warm glow that reflected the light in their eyes. "Here we go," Michael said, his voice filled with pride. Grace looked at the two babies, her heart so full it ached. "This is just the beginning," she whispered to herself. As everyone began to sing, Grace caught Hannah's eye, and they smiled at each other, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had overcome and everything they had built together. After the song, as the children dug into their cakes with messy, delighted hands, Alex raised a glass. "To our family," he said, his voice strong and clear, "to love, to resilience, and to build something beautiful out of the unexpected." Everyone raised their glasses, toasting to the unconventional path they had chosen and the love that had carried them through. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the house had quieted down, Grace and Hannah found themselves back in the kitchen, cleaning up the remnants of the celebration. The house was peaceful now, with Ethan and Olivia fast asleep in their cribs and their husbands relaxing in the living room. Hannah dried a plate and handed it to Grace. "We did it," she said softly. "We built a home, a family, out of something that could have torn us apart." Grace smiled, wiping down the counter. "We did," she agreed. "And it's only going to get better." As they finished cleaning up and turned off the lights in the kitchen, they stood at the doorway, looking out at the dimly lit living room where their families rested. Hannah leaned her head against Grace's shoulder. "Together, always." Grace wrapped her arm around Hannah, pulling her close. "Together, always," she echoed. And as they stood there, bathed in the soft glow of the living room lights, they knew that whatever the future held, they had built something that would last, a family defined not by convention, but by love and the courage to choose each other every single day. The sound of children's laughter filled the house, echoing in every corner like the soundtrack of a life Grace and Hannah had never imagined but now couldn't imagine living without. In the living room, Alex and Michael were playing with Ethan and Olivia, who were now taking their first hesitant steps. Ethan wobbled forward, leaning on Michael for support, his tiny face lighting up with joy at every successful move. Olivia, ever determined, clung to Alex's legs, trying to hoist herself up with a fierce sense of independence. "Look at them," Grace whispered, peeking through the kitchen door, her heart swelling as she watched the scene unfold. Hannah appeared beside her, tears of happiness glistening in her eyes. "Who knew we could get here?" she said softly, her voice filled with awe and gratitude. The past year had been nothing short of a roller coaster, emotional highs and crushing lows. Moments of doubt and confusion about how they would make this new family arrangement work. There had been silent tears in the night, whispered conversations about boundaries and roles, and overwhelming questions about whether they were doing the right thing. But despite all the challenges, there had also been moments of pure, unfiltered joy like watching Ethan and Olivia take their first steps together. If you're still tuned into this video and find the story inspiring, drop a 4 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. The doorbell rang, interrupting their quiet reflection. Grace smiled, stepping back as Hannah opened the door to greet their parents, Evelyn and Robert, who came bearing gifts and the proud smiles of grandparents who had watched their daughters navigate a truly extraordinary situation. "My girls," Robert said, wrapping his arms around both of them, "what you've built here. It's beyond incredible. You've made something truly special." Evelyn followed close behind, her eyes brimming with pride. "You've redefined what it means to be a family," she added, hugging them tightly. As the house filled with the warmth of friends and family, Grace found herself standing on the edge of the gathering, taking it all in. There were still moments when this life felt surreal, as though it were a dream she might wake from. But then she would look at Ethan and Olivia, at the way they giggled in their father's arms, and knew with certainty that they had made the right choice. After dinner, once the children had finally drifted off to sleep, the 4 of them, Grace, Hannah, Alex, and Michael, gathered on the deck that connected their 2 homes. The night air was warm, and Newton's starry sky stretched out above them, serene and endless. A gentle summer breeze carried the scent of fresh grass, mingling with the distant sounds of crickets chirping. Alex, ever the optimist, raised his glass. "A toast," he said, his voice full of affection and pride, "to our unconventional family." Michael smiled, clinking his glass to Alex's, "to the courage it takes to redefine what family means." Hannah's voice trembled slightly as she raised her glass, emotion shining in her eyes, "to the love that transcends every barrier." Grace, her heart overflowing, looked at the 3 people who had come to mean everything to her: the sister she had always known, the husband who had stood by her, and the brother-in-law who had become family in ways she could never have predicted. She took a deep breath, her voice soft but full of conviction. "To Ethan and Olivia," she said, her gaze flicking to the bedroom windows where their children slept peacefully, "may they grow up knowing just how deeply they are loved by all of us." Their glasses clinked together, the sound light and delicate, carrying through the quiet of the night. As they sat there under the stars, their laughter and conversation becoming softer and more intimate, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had been filled with uncertainty, fear, and sacrifice, but it had also been marked by growth, strength, and a love that had only deepened with time. There would be challenges ahead, difficult questions from Ethan and Olivia as they grew older, trying to understand their unique family dynamic, curious looks from strangers, and moments of self-doubt that would inevitably surface. But as Grace sat there, surrounded by her family, she felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. They had turned what could have been a tragedy into something beautiful and whole, a triumph of love over fear and family over convention. As the night wore on, their conversations grew quieter, becoming sleepy whispers under the blanket of stars. Grace found herself stealing one last glance at the bedroom window where Ethan and Olivia slept soundly, the soft glow of a nightlight visible through the curtains. "Good night, my love," she whispered, her voice filled with affection. "May you always know how much you are loved." She turned back toward the deck, her heart light as she joined Alex, Hannah, and Michael, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. In the end, Grace knew that no matter what came their way, they would face it together, their love strong enough to overcome anything. Together they had built not just houses, but a home. As we come to the end of this heartfelt journey, we hope you found inspiration in the story of love, family, and resilience. What have you learned from this unique tale of redefining family and overcoming challenges together? How does this story of unconventional love resonate with your own experiences? We'd love to hear from you. Please share one lesson you've taken away from this story and how you plan to bring it into practice in your life. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more stories that inspire, uplift, and challenge the way we see the world. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.